here. They're coming in from the periosteum. And this would be the nutrient foramen. So this would have been the original main blood supply for the bone that would have developed fetally, embryonically and fetally. And then you can see we have this rich supply of blood into the bone. Now we're not going to be able to really see any of these metaphyseal arteries or veins, but just given their name, you can kind of tell where they're located, right? And the epiphyseal arteries, where are the epiphyseal arteries? On the ends, where the epiphyseal region of the bone is. Yeah, so it's very, very understandable. Anything here, and you can really see the epiphyseal plate. And when we talk about bone formation, we get these two, in a long bone, we have these two areas of where the bones begin to ossify, in the tip of the epiphyseal region and in the center of the long bone. Okay, so bone formation. I think I'm going to talk about this now, but I am going to come back to this because this is kind of, sometimes can be kind of tricky. So we have these two types of bone formation. We have intramembranous ossification and endochondral ossification. Intramembranous is the type of ossification that happens in the skull. And it is basically, I'm going to show you pictures of it in detail, but basically it's this membrane. Think of the membrane that is, that you can see in the anterior fontanelles. And so that membrane, as it developed, covered the whole skull, and then these ossification centers began, and then it spread out. And Thursday, I think I will bring a fetal skull, and those of you that go into the lab between now and then, make sure you look at that fetal skull closely, and you can see the ossification forming differently. Because in the intramembranous ossification, you get it almost forms a spongy bone and then the compact bone. So the bone is ossifying from the inside out. You can actually see the diploe as it's forming. Now we call in skull bones, so you've seen compact bone and spongy bone. When we get to the skull bones, we have compact bone on the outside. But the center is not a spongy bone, it's called a diploe. Is it here? No, it's in another slide, but this is the word. And this is a type of spongy bone that is in the middle of these skull bones. So again, they're not, they have this kind of a spongy center, but it's very thin, very small, and here we go see it. So what we have in intramembranous, we have the mesenchyme, which would be this stem cells originating from the embryo. Then it forms an osteoblast, which forms spongy bone, and then the osteocytes, and then the bone. So that you kind of this is the most primitive, direct type of bone growth that we find in our skull and cranial bones. This endochondral ossification is this cartilage model. So this is a cartilage model of bone growth. So the bone is actually formed in cartilage, and then the cartilage begins to ossify from the center out. So we have mesenchyme. Here's our stem cell originating from the embryo. But then, instead of going to osteoblasts, we have chondroblasts. And this word blast means it's a formation cell. So this is chondroblast. So chondro means cartilage. So we have these cells that form the structure in cartilage. And then the chondroblasts then become osteoblasts and then become compact bone. Does that make sense? So it's like one extra step. And I can't tell you why it's that way, but it just is. I mean, that we do have this two types of bone development. And the only reason I can think of is that the intramembranous is more useful for our rapid bone growth. I mean, everything in the skull is a little bit different. And then, of course, then these are this other type of ossification, the sesamoid bone, which a mesenchyme develops in the tendon and then becomes an ossicle. Wormian bones, same kind of thing. It's just, so these are not true, these are the two main real true bone growths. These are types of bones and how they form, but it's, the ones that we're mostly concerned with are intramembranous and interchondral. And here is another picture of the intramembranous ossification. And here is the diploe, what we call the diploe. There it is. So we have this mesenchyme, and this mesenchymal tissue forms this kind of membrane, and then the osteoblasts form within it, and then, so it's this very 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. And in these centers, the reason that you see the fontanelle is because the bone is growing from the center out. And not until it has it completely closed does it close up the suture. So that's why you see the fontanelles along the suture line. Does that make sense? I think I'm kind of done. So we'll come back to this.